it's important that the authorities are condemning what is happening in these detention camps run by militias.
And you accept their condemnations?
What we say is more needs to be done, and the scale of human rights violations which we've seen in detention centers, but not only in detention centers, and where militias are responsible, the scale seems to have been underestimated. We have published this report today based on very recent research over the past few weeks in Libya, where we visited a number of detention centers, both in Tripoli and around in Misrata and surrounding areas. And the testimony we heard from detainees was horrific. People told us how they were beaten with all sorts of instruments, causing still visible injuries on their bodies. Some people were scared to talk to us because they feared further torture. And quite a number of detainees also told us that they had been coerced into making confessions to crimes they told us they did not commit.
Now, what I need to ask you, though, is whether this is about the competence of the new government, whether it's about negligence, is there complicity, but certainly you keep using in your report the word impunity, the fact essentially the militias believe they can get away with this.
That is a problem, that even in the most extreme cases which we've documented, cases where people have died under torture, no effective investigations have been carried out. The families of those who've been dying in detention centers, or also other people who've been killed, they are waiting for justice to be done, and not even initial and basic steps have been done in most cases. And we say it's very important for the new Libya that this is prevented, that these abuses are not happening, and therefore it's important that those who are responsible get a clear message that they understand they will be accountable for any crimes they commit.
But let me put it to you, Amnesty International operates in many countries where similar things are taking place. Do you believe in the new Libyan governance structures there is even the capacity to act, whether it be the security forces, the judicial system, or whatever?
It is obvious that in the current situation the state apparatus is still weak, security forces, also judiciary, but this is not sufficient an excuse. It really is important that those who commit these crimes, and we're not saying that everyone is doing it, of course, but there are far too many abuses happening, not only in detention centers, but it's also other places. We've been to camps of people who've been forcibly evicted from their homes, mainly those who are accused that they were close to the al-Gaddafi forces. And for instance, there is a, I think, well-known case of the close to Misrata, where people have been evicted by militias because this town was used as a base to shell Misrata. So these people now live in camps all over Libya, and in one location only 10 days ago, people were shot. 2 people died in the camp and 5 outside.
Carsten Jurgensen, I have to stop you there, but thank you very much indeed for sharing the research and the evidence that you brought to light here on the Hub. Carsten Jurgensen, who's from Amnesty International. Relatives of prison inmates caught in a massive fire in Honduras are still waiting to hear who has died and who survived. The director of the Honduran prison system has been suspended, so has the governor of the prison in Comayagua, after more than 350 prison inmates were confirmed dead. The cause of the fire is unknown. Some reports say it was set by an inmate, others that it was an electrical fault. We're live now on the Hub to outside the prison to the BBC's Will Grant. Will, first of all, is it clear what happened to the prisoners? Why so few of them managed to get out?
It seems, as we know, this was a very overcrowded prison, typical of the Honduran prison system, far too overcrowded, far too antiquated, and very, very dangerous. And as it turned out, once the fire took hold, and as you pointed out, we don't quite know how that began, many prisoners were just simply trapped inside their cells and burnt to death behind bars. And there is testimony from prison guards and others saying they simply did not have the keys in order to get the prisoners out.
What about the way the government is handling this? It's all very well having two senior figures being suspended, but what about the overall responsibility for this?
I think that's right. I think it is all very well to make knee-jerk dismissals, but I think really the government will be judged by the Honduran people in the coming days and weeks. This is not the first time that an event of this magnitude has happened, not quite as bad as this. This indeed is one of the worst of its kind in Latin American history, but there was a case in 2004 when 100 inmates died from a prison fire, and the government of the day then claimed that it would do all it could to never let it happen again. The jury is most certainly out about whether or not this government is going to be able to improve on that record.
Will Grant there in Comayagua. Thank you very much indeed for joining me here on The Hub. Now, the Afghan President Hamid Karzai has confirmed his government and the United States have started talks with the Taliban. He made the first public acknowledgement of the contacts. That was before meeting Pakistan's President and Prime Minister in Islamabad. Until recently, the Taliban publicly denounced our government as a puppet regime. It rejected any dealings, and a Taliban spokesman has now denied the contacts claimed by the Afghan president. Well, when the BBC's Aleem Maqbool joined me on The Hub from Islamabad, I asked him what impact Hamid Karzai's confirmation has now had.
Well, it's been in the pipeline, and there were signs that this was happening for the last few weeks or so, so it's not necessarily a surprise. And what he's here to do is to really ask for the Pakistani support in this process, because both he and the Americans recognize that with the kind of influence that Pakistan has over large elements within the Taliban, Pakistan is crucial if this reconciliation process is to succeed. And there is some suggestion that the Pakistanis have already been involved in some way, even for the talks to have got this far. But he's asking for much more support from the Pakistanis. But there's also some suggestion from diplomats on both sides that they might also be looking at a separate track that doesn't involve the United States in terms of getting Afghans, you know, the Kabul government and Taliban together.
Aleem Maqbool in Islamabad. Meanwhile, 21 people have been killed in 2 attacks by US drones in the Pakistani region of North Waziristan. That's the tribal area near the border with Afghanistan. The first strike near the town of Spalgar killed 6 people. The second near Mirala killed 15 people, all thought to be Uzbeks. Now, the UN General Assembly is expected to vote later on a resolution condemning the violence in Syria. The draft says the Syrian authorities are involved in widespread and systematic violations of human rights and fundamental freedoms. It fully supports the Arab League peace plan, calling on President Assad to step aside and hand over power. If passed, this new resolution will be non-binding. It's expected to be passed, unlike the last draft, at the more powerful Security Council, which Russia and China vetoed 12 days ago. The BBC's Mike Woodridge has more details.
The Sunni neighborhood of Baba Amro in the city of Homs. Coming under shelling for the 13th day in a row, according to an activist group, which says that at least 4 people were killed. And amateur videos surfacing today of what's said to be rebels attacking a Syrian government tank in the town of Zabadani to the northwest of Damascus. This apparently last Friday, while the town was still largely held by the opposition. It was stormed by government troops earlier this week. Continuing violence, France is attempting to negotiate a new UN Security Council resolution on Syria with Russia, including creating humanitarian corridors to help the civilian population. But we're not naive, French Foreign Minister Alain Juppé said, and there's no question we would accept the political status quo in Syria. That's why we want to continue working with the Arab League to ensure a political transition. And I understand the Russians do not disagree with that. To President Assad, whose forces are seen here on the streets of Homs, the battle is against what he calls armed terrorist gangs. Today, one of the region's eminent figures was asked his view of the Syrian president's intentions.
Speaking of a soft landing was basically referring to the fact that he has given the green light to Farouk al-Shara to address all the opposition, which of course means outside Syria and inside Syria.
The UN General Assembly is expected to vote later on an Arab-sponsored, non-binding resolution calling on President Assad to stop attacks on civilians. UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon said he hoped the international community would speak with one voice. Mike Aldridge, BBC News.
You're with The Hub with me, Nick Gowing. The headlines coming up, plus sport, including more on the 4 football referees jailed in China for match fixing and bribery.